Hello everybody, I'm Viktoria Austin and I'm your host for today. This is ShadowTalk. We are covering the weekly highlights in the cybersecurity field. Joining me to discuss the weekly highlights are Phil Doherty and Adam Cook.
Hey, welcome back.
Oh, yeah.
We are in London, that's why it's great to have you guys here joining me. To get things started, we're going to dive into the first story, which involves news from Adobe. So Adobe reported that they had an unsecured Elasticsearch database, which resulted in the exposure of account information belonging to 7.5 million Adobe Creative Cloud users. So I guess, Adam, how was the data first discovered?
Yeah, interesting one. So details primarily included information about customer accounts, reportedly no passwords or financial information, but this was stuff like email addresses, member IDs, country of origin, etc., etc. And there is one or two specific security researchers that have been kind of looking at this stuff since about 2015. And in that time, there's an interesting article written by the pair of them where they were kind of discussing the extent to which Elasticsearch is continuing to be compromised or exposed. So since 2015, the pair were saying that out of all the data breaches that they've seen, they estimated that 60% can be traced to exposed Elasticsearch instances, which is, quite significant. But, you've got people, I suppose the key point from them is that you've got not only, it's quite lucky that you've got white hats, as it were, like-minded security researchers out there looking for this stuff so they can identify it before, I guess, malicious threat actors would. So, yeah, it's just a case of these guys doing research into it, especially Elasticsearch, which has had a fair few instances.
Yeah, I think it's actually worth kind of distinguishing or identifying what Elasticsearch is, because there are quite a few databases. So there's another example would be MongoDB.
Yep.
Elasticsearch specifically is kind of like a document store. So this means that it's designed for like text searching. And I guess Adobe would have used Elasticsearch based on a certain use case. So I guess it's down to preference how an organization stores its data. But yeah, I think if we just touch on the fact that you mentioned it was white hats that discovered it, having it publicly exposed does make a cyber criminal's job a lot easier here, doesn't it?
And it's not difficult to find this stuff. They talk about how simple their methodology actually is. So it's just a case of a set of search engines that crawl the web for exposed IPs and ports. I guess probably Showdown is part of that toolkit. Similar to how Google crawls the web for different websites, they use these tools that they can use to see what's connected and what's exposed, like exposed endpoints, etc.
Yeah, and I think if we talk about like a bit more specifically about how it was exposed, so in this or in certain cases, it would have been publicly available on the internet, which allowed the security researchers to locate the database. But it shouldn't be made publicly available. So if an organization was looking to prevent this kind of exposure moving forwards or have it prevented just overall, we should be looking at, I guess the first step is having authentication to kind of prevent people accessing it. And then I guess another thing to consider is to not have the data exposed on the internet in the first place, which goes back to the point of having this sort of monitoring in place. I think another thing to kind of touch on is Elasticsearch in general, the actual security protocols, because I think similar to kind of S3, so Amazon S3, if I just kind of hark back to the fact that we had research which looked at the number of databases exposed, this was called TMI, we identified the fact that within a year, S3 buckets had kind of decreased, the number of files exposed on S3 files had decreased, because over time, Amazon S3 had introduced an S3 bucket protocol, so a security protocol which prevented it from being inadvertently exposed. And I guess if we kind of liken it to Elasticsearch, maybe a similar process should be introduced to prevent this inadvertent exposure.
Definitely. Yeah, I think the
100%.
Elasticsearch specifically doesn't yet have a built-in authentication or authorization mechanism. So that obviously then requires further investment and configuration on the user's end. And I think that's just typical, the added effort that takes or that requires to make something more secure. And I think, these researchers came out and said it. It's not, there is the documentation there is the information there to provide to users if they are looking to secure this stuff. So it's just that little bit of extra effort to help raise the bar, like the standard for security can be raised, and it's not that difficult to do. So I think, like you say, if you were to compare the two of them, there's definitely a case to be made for Elasticsearch to implement something as a standard, perhaps.
Yeah. I'm also just looking at a blog that Elasticsearch had published. This was in May 2019, and the headline is "Security for Elasticsearch is now free," which indicates that security prior to this announcement was not free. So it was an additional add-on, which kind of, the fact that you have to pay for a protocol or pay to prevent your security from being exposed is, I guess, is kind of confuses me, like, why is that? Why do people have to pay for that?
It'd be interesting.
It'd
be interesting to look at the figures, wouldn't it? If you looked at it beforehand when it wasn't free, and then you compared the amount of people that took that security on after it became free. That'd be an interesting survey to do.
Also, the announcement highlights that the free security features apply to certain versions that you have. So people who haven't updated to the latest version or may not have paid for the latest version won't have this access. So, I guess it kind of, they're kind of like rank. I guess they're certain members are allowed in the club and others aren't. Like, everyone should be given access to security, like
the security club.
Yeah, exactly. I just think overall that's an interesting development, and I imagine other organizations are going to be facing the same issue with Elasticsearch, having not known what's out there. So I guess the next thing to then move on to is this ongoing, or shall we say, this ransomware attack that the City of Johannesburg is currently experiencing. So to kind of get in a bit more detail, the City of Joburg released a statement acknowledging that they had detected a network breach in their systems, which allowed attackers to have unauthorized access to the system. I'm kind of looking, actually, when I look at the statement, it says the City of Joburg releases a statement that they had identified a network breach, but then this kind of conflicts with the fact that on their actual website there was a statement from the actual attackers that said, "Your city has been hacked. Hello, Joburg City. Here are ShadowKill hackers speaking. All of your servers and data have been hacked." So I guess, did they identify the hack after this note had been added to their website? That kind of can be determined a bit later on. But anyway, I've got Phil here to kind of go in a bit more detail. But when we talk about the network breach, I guess importantly, what was kind of affected here?
Yeah, I think when I read this first, it got a bit confusing, because when you say the City of Johannesburg, you think every single person in there is getting targeted with a ransomware attack or a ransom attack. But no, it's specifically the City of Joburg company, so sort of their websites and their systems. So the ransom attack took place started, should I say, on the 24th of October, and it was initially a network compromise and data breach. So they accessed, not 100% sure what data it is, but they're demanding 4 Bitcoin for it. So it's about $37,000 US as payment to regain control of some of this sort of undisclosed sensitive data. I think all they talk about is that it's data related to the city at this stage, but there's an investigation ongoing. So you're right, you mentioned they were called ShadowKill. So not a lot of information is out there about this group at the moment, but I'm sure as this keeps going on and as the investigation unfolds, there'll be a few more reports talking about who they are, what they do, or sort of their previous activity as well.
I think, when you talk about previous activity, it'd be interesting to understand whether the same group were responsible for the first attack on the power. Was it the power?
The one in July.
Yeah, in July. Yeah. So to kind of make it a bit clearer, so this is the second attack that has impacted the city of Joburg.
Yeah. So this time around, it looked at sort of customer-facing systems. So you've got e-services, billing, payment systems, the city website itself. Whereas the last one was targeting the power supply grid, and sort of that aspect of the critical national infrastructure.
But also to kind of go back to the point about the actual ransomware fee. So in response, the Johannesburg finance chief has said that they're not going to concede to the attacker's demands. I think the deadline to pay the ransomware fee was on the 28th
Yeah.
at 5 p.m. And so at this stage, we need to identify whether the attackers will live up to their claim that they're just going to release the data. So
yeah, it's a good point. Especially now, if we can't get onto the website, that might be quite interesting. Typically, if you get to at the end of a ransom deadline as well, and no one's paid up, it can go one of two ways. It can go, okay, I'm going to disclose all of this information that we've got on you to the public, or if they are sort of just claiming attention, then you don't really see much of a fallout of it. It's one of those, let's hedge our bets and try and get some money by demanding these Bitcoin, but it's one of those where as the investigation goes on, more will come out about it. But the whole infrastructure not the whole infrastructure, that's a bad way of saying it, but some of the infrastructure surrounding some of the cities in South Africa, from a cybersecurity standpoint, they're lacking a bit. So I'm not saying this is how they managed to conduct these attacks specifically, but there are opportunities to conduct some significant cyber activity through aspects like load shedding. So load shedding is, for anyone who's listening and doesn't know, it's sort of where power is managed and sometimes prevented in certain cities for a disclosed period of time due to the poor energy infrastructure that they have. So if systems go offline due to load shedding and the likes of backup generators restore certain systems that may not have updated security standards or were in the middle of performing updates or downloads or anything like that, that could be a legitimate pathway to exploit. So there are timetables to manage this shedding that goes on or control this shedding times. But the age-old thing of human error is always going to intervene at any stage. I think that one of the other things to talk about is why these types of cities and this type of industry is targeted. So you've got the power supply grid that's targeted in July, and you've got another aspect of the national infrastructure being sort of the city website, the city payments, potentially contact information, or the ability to contact the city itself. They are highly desirable by a whole range of threat actors. So particularly given the impact that can have. So for example, energy power grids, then you're not going to have any power. You could affect water supplies, city website and emergency services contactability. These are all perceptively, or these could increase the perception that they might pay a ransom demand in the first place. And if you have a lack of infrastructure, or if you have poor security standards in the city, then the two go together quite nicely for a threat actor.
Been a couple of cases like that in the US, I think, over the last couple of years. Going after the communications systems for the emergency services in certain states.
The emergency services they're a really highly targeted one. I'd say there's a fair few of those goes on.
Yeah, and I think when you end up in those services, it's not the first place you want to be, and you don't consider when you're going to visit the hospital or you're in an emergency service that their security isn't it's not what you think about when you're there.
Exactly.
Your security, so
you're there for one reason. But yeah, I mean, when the methods of this come out, I'm sure there'll be more information on the investigation.
I think specifically more around the tools that they used, or
exactly,
how they gained access.
Whether it was a tool or if it was just the breach that was
the actual information as well. It's quite for a highly targeted incident like that, it's quite a, I don't know, would you say large sum to demand?
No, I would have thought if you're going to be targeting a city itself, or claiming to be targeting a city, you'd be asking for a bit more than 37 grand.
Be interesting to see if it was a bluff, though. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
if they came in, like, I'm struggling to think, like, what kind of information they could legitimately, like, steal. It would be, it's an interesting one to watch, despite being
regardless,
low
it's
level.
extremely disruptive. So
Yeah.
Cool. Well, the next story involves APT28, aka Fancy Bear, not to be confused with the group Fancy Bears,
Certainly
which
not.
I mistakenly, I got that wrong. But APT28 have been identified targeting anti-doping authorities and sporting organisations. So Adam, I'll kind of lead this into.
Yes, so another instance reported on by the Microsoft Threat Intel Center, who are claiming that Fancy Bear, APT28, have been targeting anti-doping authorities and sporting organisations around the world. I think it was 16 different campaigns or cases that they said. And quite timely in that I think the World Anti-Doping Agency had just released a warning or like reported on something in September time that Russia could still face a ban from all major sporting events. For those that aren't aware, they were handed a ban for the last Olympic Games, and that it was widely reported to have incentivized or kind of kicked off APT28's previous targeting. This isn't the first time that APT28 have done something like this. I think it was back in 2016 and 2018. They were reported to have been hacking various organizations, again, including the World Anti-Doping Agency, accessing databases and releasing medical records and emails for some of the US Olympic gymnastics team. And I think there were even some tennis stars in there, Serena and Rafa Nadal, I think were both included in that. So it's interesting. It's kind of, I don't know if it's too early to say they're doing it as prep for the Tokyo Games, or if it was just in direct kind of retaliation to the anti-doping agency's report. But, you know, it's an interesting angle if it is to be associated or in preparation for Tokyo Games. It's an interesting angle to some of the activity that we usually see around these kind of events.
So what are their like traditional tactics?
Yeah, they haven't changed actually for this stuff. Or Microsoft are saying that they're using similar tactics that they have used to target other entities like governments, military and defense, think tanks, law firms, human rights organizations, etc. So traditionally, spear phishing, fraudulent emails, password spraying, or kind of like brute forcing tactics, and exploiting internet-connected devices. I think it wasn't all that long ago that APT28 were observed conducting a campaign that was doing like targeting IoT devices through the dynamic link library. Got that one right?
IoTs,
Yeah. So they're highly capable, highly active, and persistent against all walks of life, really. And I think there was a use of kind of open source and custom malware as well. So advanced toolkit, advanced tactics, and like I said, it's a kind of interesting point in the kind of the different form of attack that we see to major sporting events. So certainly events like the Olympics often attract attention from a variety of different threat actors due to their significance and the kind of media coverage that they get globally. There's loads of stuff to talk about there. We could do a whole podcast on that, but in a nutshell, it's like, you get financially motivated cyber criminals that are, setting up phishing pages and selling fake tickets and trying to capitalize on the event in that way. This event's significance often attract attention from like ideologically motivated activists. Anonymous have always been quite active towards, especially the Olympics.
And sorry, Adam, did you write a blog on?
I did.
Yes.
Have you just dug that up, have you?
Well,
You're getting the plug on now. Like this.
I thought I would lead into it. So.
Yeah, feel free. Ask away.
Well, I guess first of all, I'm trying to find it, but I specifically remember
it was the World Cup actually last year, 2018 World Cup in Russia.
Yeah. Okay.
But talked a little bit about some of those things I was just discussing there, in that I think Searchlight had actually detected several phishing pages that were World Cup related and FA or FIFA related, So we use that as examples for some of those points I was discussing there. That often you get phishing pages set up because you have people from all over the world that are traveling to these places, and they are preparing on the internet. So they're looking for websites, they're looking for stuff to do there, they're looking for tickets to other events that are associated with it, and that is just a goldmine for would-be cyber criminals, because there's just massively increased footfall. It's not just phishing pages and stuff. There's all the infrastructure around those events. So there's all the free public Wi-Fi. The heightened use of point of sale systems at the Olympic parks or the fan zones, etc.
Yeah. So even though your blog kind of applied to the World Cup, it's still relevant to the upcoming Olympics 2020.
Interestingly, we tend to see a lot of the similar attacks or similar campaigns associated with those sporting events, whether that's from, your nation state espionage, financially motivated cybercrime, or kind of the hacktivists. You tend to see a lot of different bits and bobs popping up.
Yeah. Well, nice. I think just while we're on the topic of blogs, Digital Shadows has also published a blog around cybercriminal credit card stores. So recently, news broke that the AVC Brian's Club had been hacked. So quite ironic in that sense. But what we kind of did is we sort of looked at the impact of this hack on the wider cyber criminal landscape and sort of what this means specifically for AVCs. And I think stemming from this research or this blog, we also thought we would distinguish the difference between an AVC, a forum, and a marketplace, because I think internally those terms can get a bit confusing, as well as externally. If you have your eyes, if you want to have kind of visibility into the deep and dark web, we also have this sort of glossary around the terms. So yeah, I definitely, if you're interested in AVCs or interested in general more around kind of deep and the dark web, the kind of glossary will definitely help support your reading and kind of help you identify the differences moving forward. So you can read that research at resources.digitalshadows.com. In addition to the blogs that we've just released, I definitely recommend supporting your research, or as Adam likes to call it, supplement your research.
Supplement your knowledge, actually.
Supplement your knowledge, okay. By signing up to our Intsum. So that is a coverage around the weekly highlights. And you can read it by signing up to resources.digitalshadows.com. So that is it for this week. We hope you enjoyed listening. Thank you, Adam and Phil, for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me, as always.